with the Baltimore County Department of Aging, providing community-wide dementia education, dementia resources, dementia care partner support. So there are three distinct functions that her department does. And those are dementia education, like one of the ones that are going to happen now here, dementia resources, and dementia care partner support. She was previously the head for the Dementia Friendly Massachusetts and a consultant with the Massachusetts Lifespan Respite Coalition. She has also hosted a TV program called Caring for Others, Caring for Ourselves. She has also created a multimedia art installation called Dementia's Way. Her personal experience was with her parents who both lived with dementia. So she has a personal experience with this ailment. Dr. Emily Kearns earned her PhD, doctorate degree in sociology from Boston College and an executive MBA from Northeastern University. She is a certified dementia practitioner, end-of-life doula, somatic care consultant, installation artist, and Reiki master. So as you can see that Dr. Emily Kearns is a well-qualified, well-educated, and well-experienced dementia specialist. So without taking any additional time, I would like to invite our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Emily Kearns. Kindly come over. And as I mentioned that we have 1 hour, including Q&A.
Great, thank you.
You want me to do it?
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Can you all hear me in the back? I have laryngitis, so I just want to make sure. Can you hear? Okay, great. So, first of all, it's an honor to be here. You welcomed me a few months back, and I was delighted. I felt like I was home. And Rashid is right. My sister, Nolita Zainul Abidin, is here because I lived in 1977 in a Malay village, a Muslim village, with Nolita and her family. And so I have two families. One was Irish Catholic, another is Malay Muslim. So I feel very much at home, and so thank you again. It's an honor to be here. Actually, first of all, let me start. Every presentation I give, I start with this exuberant self in the middle, because that's who we all are. We come with gifts and we come with challenges. And as we grow older, sometimes our challenges are more obvious and sometimes they're not so obvious. But sometimes, especially in America, in our culture, dominant culture, we think about the young so much. And the older people still are these exuberant beings, aren't we? I'm one of them now. And we're not celebrated. But in the dementia-friendly movement, the whole person is celebrated. So I always start with this person that embodies all of us, with our gifts and our challenges, whether they're seen or not. So this is the arc of today's conversation. I want us to start with a conversation about presence. What I mean by that, you'll come to know, it means showing up for. It means being present to. It means being a presence for that exuberant person. In our culture, and let me just ask you, when you hear the word dementia, just popcorn style, throw out, what do you think of? I say dementia and you say what? What is it? Memory loss. What else? popcorn style. Okay, it's hard to hear, but just check in with your energy when you hear the word dementia. It's one of the diseases that's most feared, most stigmatized. Cancer used to be like this decades ago. If you're old enough like I am, you may recall if someone in the family had cancer, it was pretty taboo. You didn't talk about it. Dementia is like that today, and some cultures even more, very stigmatized. The person living with dementia and the family becomes quite isolated. So what I'm going to start with is a conversation about presence. And I'm finding that faith communities like yourselves are a place that get it. They understand what presence means because it means filled with spirit. In your community, filled with Allah. In the Catholic community, filled with God, the Holy Spirit. But it means filling with the divine and seeing the divine in one another. And so I'm going to start with that conversation. And then I'm going to move us together to look at the statistics. Why is this so important? It's so important because you'll see the demographic press. Given the numbers, and actually a show of hands, how many of us are already living with some experience of dementia in our community, in our families, or do we live even fearing it when we forget a word? Both my parents lived and passed with dementia, so you can imagine if I forget a word, right? I get very nervous. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about society. We're going so fast. And I'll talk about a book that has changed my life because the author asks, who is left behind as we go faster and faster? Then we'll talk about why I'm here. How can faith communities be a safe place for people who are living with such a stigmatized disease and their caregivers or care partners? How can the faith communities be supportive? Also, how can the faith communities give worship that's accessible? Like that video was so fast, and I'm a fast-speaking northerner. He was speaking so fast, I thought someone with any cognitive challenges could not follow what he was saying. So then I'll ask us to think about, or you to think about together, what does that mean for ISB? What does it mean for meals to be dementia friendly? What does it mean for your lectures to be dementia friendly? So that's the arc of today. How does that sound? And anything else you want. Okay, I'm here to serve. This is your time, and I'm here to collaborate and facilitate. So I always start with the stories about presencing because this is how I learned about dementia, and I didn't even know it. So this is my great-grandmother, Emily, after whom I'm named. It was such a problem in Catholic schools because the nuns would say, write an essay about the saint you're named after. And I wasn't named after a saint. I was named after my great-grandmother. It was a problem for me as a little girl. I adored this woman, though. She lived with dementia. We said she was senile. It's the word we used then. We don't use that word now. We said she was demented. Again, we don't use that word now because of the stigma. Just like we don't say the word retarded. We have changed our language, and we're still working on that. Let me tell you about one of my first lessons with presencing. Okay, a new word, presencing. So we'd go visit my grandmother, Emily, and she would sit in silence because she was also hard of hearing. But my father would bring all of us, I'm one of 7, bring all of us to see Grandma Emily, Grandma Spooner. We didn't call her by her first name. And we would sit by her feet in a very traditional way. And for a child, it felt like eternity because she didn't speak and we didn't speak, and it went on forever. But my father thought it was important for us to honor her, to visit her. So one day, all the other children had left, and it was just me and my father. I was about 8 years old. And rumor has it, I look like my mother. So we were getting ready to leave, and Grandma Spooner took my hand very strongly and started crying. And she called me by my mother's name. She said, "Ellen, I'm so sorry. I have nothing for you and Don," my father, standing next to me, "for your wedding." You can imagine a 7 or 8-year-old girl. I freaked out. I was like, what? My father didn't blink. This is my first lesson in dementia. I didn't even know I was getting it. My father did not correct her. He did not humiliate her. He took her other hand. I'm getting chills now. He took her other hand and he said, "Grandma, don't worry. I know you love us, and that's enough." We said goodbye. I got in the car. I was totally freaked out. This woman thought I was my mother. What does that mean? My father never spoke about it, never spoke negatively, never said she had dementia, nothing. Okay, flash forward. Do you know, it wasn't that a blessing from God, from Allah, that I had that, and then later I would be blessed with taking care of my father. Next, whoops. Okay, someone you may recognize. Oh, Ida, you're not in this picture. This is my Malay family, picture from 1977. This is a second lesson in dementia, and I had no idea what God was, or Allah was bringing to me all these times. So, I lived with this beautiful family, 4 generations in one home. That house is still there. Abba, our father, Lolita's father, I call him my father, still lives there. You see Nanny is sitting in the middle steps. She lived with dementia. I was 16, a 16 American AFS exchange student. I had no idea still about aging or dementia. I was running track and doing what teenagers do, really oblivious to the elders actually. But Nanny, this is a second lesson in presence, and Nolita can tell you more over dinner, but Nanny was part of our circle. So as maybe in many of your cultures, the men would be in one part of the house, the woman would be preparing the food, and I would be there in my sarong preparing the food, and Nanny's job was to clean the rice and take the stones out of the rice. And also Nanny was responsible for washing her clothes, which was her sarong. Every day we would go to the washroom, and each one of us, mostly, would wash our clothes and hang them. Nanny never spoke, but she would sit in our circle of women, and she would laugh and giggle, and you know, sometimes the younger children would poke a little bit, but she was squarely in our circle. She was not made fun of, and one day she simply died. And then Nolita and Noraini, the other sister, had to wash her body and put it out in your Muslim tradition. But Nanny was not isolated, and she did what she could do, and she was honored, and the rest of the family showed up for her, were a presence. So these are examples that really sensitized me, and I didn't even know what was happening. It sensitized me to a different way of being for someone who's living with a disability or with a challenge, and especially an elder who was given so much. So I was really blessed. My final example, these are my American parents. I said I have 2 families, and I do. So my mother and father, when they were young, and then when they were older here. My father lived with an Alzheimer's diagnosis, my mother a mixed dementia diagnosis. I'll tell you a story, and not to wax sentimental at all, but to really go at what changed my life. So they lived with dementia for over a decade. And you know, some siblings and family and friends, they dropped off. They would say to me, my nickname, Emmy, "Why do you go see them? They don't remember you, they don't know who you are. What's the point?" And I would say, I had a different sensibility. I don't know why. Maybe from those other experiences. Maybe just from angels. I don't know. But I said it's important, no matter what, to be a presence, right? To be a presence. 2 things that taught me that was true. Toward the end of my father's life, one day I went to visit him. He was in a nursing home, unfortunately. That was not my plan. But he was in a nursing home. He took my hand and he squeezed it and he said, "I have no idea who you are, but I'm so grateful that you're here. That is presence. And the last thing I'll say about my father, and this changed my life as well, is that he was in the home, as I said, and he was cared for by staff, and one was a Kenyan man, a very young, very religious man, young black Kenyan man. And one day, my father was actively passing, very much in a fetal position in his bed. And I came to his room and they were having a private moment, so I just stood back by the door. And this again was really impactful. I heard the Kenyan man speak to my father, and he was on his knees, the Kenyan man, and he had my father's hands, and he said, "Old man, thank you for your song." My father, in his last days, would just walk and sing and sing. He was a mathematician, a photographer, a musician. In his last days, he just loved to walk and loved to sing. And what that taught me was, while everyone else dismissed him, oh, he's had a good life, but he's done. Let it go. You don't need to see him, blah, blah, blah. I thought, hell's bells, this man is still valuable. This man had an impact on the young Kenyan man who was bathing him, toileting him. My father had value. Still. And I walked away from there, no longer a sociologist, but probably a preacher, because it transformed me. After they passed, it took a year off. I quit college teaching, and I thought, I want to get more resources for families, because we very much didn't have them. It was very much a first rodeo. We didn't know what we were doing. But I also wanted to raise awareness about elders and living with dementia and their value, and also the value the journey can teach the care partners, the children, the adult children. So we'll stop with all the sentimental and we'll go to the numbers, which are just as sobering. But I need to start with the heart, because the faith communities are the place I'm finding where the heart is seen and where people come together with the heart. And one of the things that you'll learn, if I were to come back to do like an in-depth training, is that as the computer brain closes down, which is what happens with dementia, very often the heart, the emotional intelligence opens up. And very often, and I think this is where the faith communities come in, and I felt it just right at your door, the warmth of the presence in a faith community, not all, but that's why I'm here, in many faith communities, is what will connect with the person whose computer brain is not wired fully. So let's get into what is dementia and look at it. In the day-to-day, I know we hear the word Alzheimer's and dementia used interchangeably, but actually that's an error. Dementia is an umbrella term, and many of you perhaps know all of this, so it's just a refresher for all of us. But dementia is an umbrella term. And do you know, right now it's wild. The research is just phenomenal. There's about 100 different types of dementia. So I'm a doctor of sociology, but not an MD. So I only know a little bit about the medical piece of things. But Alzheimer's is the most common. So about 60% of all dementia diagnoses in the US, for example, are Alzheimer's. So that's why people use it interchangeably. But what's real important for folks, and this is like number one stop when people call, so they call the Department of Aging, and often usually desperate, and say, what can we do? I don't know what's going on. And usually the person has journeyed quite a while, living with challenges, and the caregiver also. I say, get a good diagnosis. So what's really important is to go past, work with your primary. But I don't know why, but one of my theories, so I don't want to offend anybody here, but one of my theories is because of ageism in our culture. I saw it with my parents and I see it with others. A proper diagnosis isn't always given. So for example, my mother lost her speech, and I told the doctor, I want a proper neurological workup. And the doctor looked at me right in the eye and said, why? She's going to die anyway. So I said, you're summarily fired. I said, because from the day we're born, we're all heading in that direction. And if she were 20, you wouldn't say that. Now I understand at some point, and we had to do this as a family, so I understood the concept behind what the doctor was saying. But she deserved, as we all do, a proper diagnosis. And this is what the first lesson as a caregiver individually, but also as a community, is advocacy. Is that you'll have to say to your primary, thank you for doing the mini mental, which is a 15-minute test where you're asked to remember words and draw a clock. Most primaries are not trained in dementia, and because of ageism, many of my older women friends will go to the primary and they'll come back and say, they did the mini mental and they told me I have Alzheimer's. And I said, well, that's a good start. I know you love your primary, but go to a neurologist. So I ask all of you to make sure you go to a specialist or bring your loved one to a specialist, because this is the other thing, and this is where the primary is helpful, is that there are a lot of conditions that present like dementia. I call them dementia imposters. And they are curable. Dementia, unfortunately, all the different types, there is no cure. I was talking to my brother because I'm concerned about one of my sisters. He said, well, Emmy, we'll just get her a diagnosis and then we'll get her treatment. Now, he's a psychotherapist. I said, Jeremiah, there is no treatment. There was silence. I said, but there are ways of presenting. There are evidence-based research programs we can use, but there is no magic wand. And maybe that's why, too, people don't go to get a diagnosis, because my sister and I have said to each other at some points, what's the point? You get a diagnosis and it's pretty depressing. But I'll tell you why it's important. So you have dementia imposters, such as thyroid. You could have a thyroid condition that presents with cognitive challenges, and that's not curable, but there's treatment. So my father lived with Graves' disease, which is a thyroid issue. There was treatment, medicine. You could have vitamin deficiency. That's also treatable. Also, especially in times of COVID, you could be depressed and have mental health issues. That is not dementia. Sometimes, and we believe my mother had both, had mental health and dementia, but it got scrambled up. She didn't have a proper diagnosis. Sometimes people refused. My mother refused. She was very religious, and she said, God will heal, or God will provide, or not. But I'm not going to any of these people. All right. But so they just gave her the diagnosis, mixed dementia. My father was different. He wanted to know, mathematician, scientist. So he got the proper diagnosis. The other reason to get a proper diagnosis is this. I used to run a social day program, and another program at the YMCA. We did fitness. We do chair yoga and meditation, and we play soccer. We had so much fun. And one of the men, for example, had an Alzheimer's diagnosis. But he was like a mouse. If there was even a wrapper of a candy in the corner of a closet, he would find it. He was food obsessed. And one day I said, that doesn't feel like Alzheimer's to me. They went back to another neurologist and he got a better diagnosis. It was actually frontal temporal dementia, which is very different. And while there's no cure, to understand the different behaviors is really important. So we did behavior modification, like we didn't have any food in sight, and we definitely wouldn't walk by a candy store, you know, like the YMCA had a counter with candy. We didn't go by that with him. And then he became part of the group. He settled. Another example, I have a dear friend who's a dementia advocate who lives with Lewy bodies. Maybe some of you know Robin Williams, for example, lived with Lewy bodies. He died by suicide, but much more probably related to depression and his dementia. Lewy bodies, often a symptom is hallucinations. So my friend, and he lets me use his name, he's amazing, but he used to smell smoke. And so he and his wife, he thought he had Alzheimer's. That was his diagnosis. He'd smell smoke and he'd call the fire department and they would come. There's no smoke, there's no fire. After a few rodeos of this, they were like, what is going on? He went to another neurologist and he was diagnosed with Lewy bodies. Now when he smells smoke, of course he checks it out with he and his wife, and he has a great sense of humor. So now he kind of jokes about it. So that's an example, right? One more example from him. We went to lunch, and this would, if you wanted to do an in-depth training, this would be one of the things around becoming dementia friendly here in a faith community. You want to look at your signage to make sure it's very accessible for someone with cognitive challenges. In his case, for example, we went to lunch. He said, I need to use the restroom. Okay, I'll wait here. He comes back and he's laughing, and I said, what's so funny, Mike? He said, I didn't know which door to go through. On the one is a mermaid, on the other is a pirate. He said, what the heck? A mermaid or a pirate? Which door is a man supposed to go through? So we laughed. It was his dementia. In Lewy bodies and some other types, the meaning making, the semiotics, the sign, the understanding, the representation, understanding what the symbol represents falls apart. That link can't be made any longer. So real important for communities like this and for businesses to, especially I say in an emoji cute culture where we're getting cuter and cuter, it's not so cute actually for folks who want to be independent and they don't want to ask and feel like a child and say, I need to use the restroom, which should I use? You know? So those are examples of why to get a good diagnosis, because once you have one, we know what we're dealing with. Anyway, different types, and then Parkinson's often comes with dementia in the later stages as well. So the statistics are sobering. These are last year's, but they're still relevant. More than 6 million folks in the US alone are living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And because you just saw the umbrella, we know this is an underestimate of all dementias, right? Because the numbers focus on Alzheimer's. So we know it's much larger than that. Every year the Alzheimer's Association, which by the way is an incredible resource, you can use them and you don't need to have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. At the end of this, and you can all have this presentation if you want, there's a 24/7 helpline that you can call. If you're at your wit's end and you're a care partner or caregiver, you can call them. But I say it's much more than that. It's actually a resource bank. You can say, we need a social day program now. I can't take care of my mother 24/7. I'm losing my mind and I'm getting sick, and they can help you find one in your area. But what's important about their statistics is they also show the number of caregivers. So here in Maryland, you'll see in a moment, there's more than 110,000 of us living with Alzheimer's. There's more than 224,000 caregivers. But how many of us feel alone and isolated, right? Like we're the only ones. When people call, that's one of the things I say, there's no magic wand, there's no Disney here, but you are not alone. And I think that's a first help. But anyway, so you can see in the US, more than 11 million Americans are providing care for folks living with Alzheimer's. And what's real important is that has a value. And I want you all to hear this, because if you ever end up, even though I know it's not ideal, if you end up living in assisted living or a memory residence, or your loved one does, it's hugely expensive. And every year they crank it up, how expensive it is. I mean really expensive, like $7,000 to $10,000 per month. And what I want you to do is to document the free hours that you are giving to that corporation when your loved one gets angry or falls or won't take their medicine, and they call you as a family member, because you're becoming more and more quasi-staff. So I'm telling caregivers, care partners about this now, and they're using it, and it seems to help. When they raise the rent, The caregivers are saying, well, I don't know, last week I spent 25 hours here helping your staff, and we want to anyway, right, as family? Of course we want to. But we also don't want to give away everything we have to corporations who are supporting our loved ones. And the sobering reality is, and we just heard the video before, if we don't protect our assets, and even if we try to, he was dancing around the sober tune, they'll take even our homes. And I grew up actually highly educated but very poor. 7 kids, 1 father working in a small religious college, mom home full time. So we didn't have money. We had a lot of love and we had a lot of education. But when it came time for them to get care, we had to sell the only thing that they wanted us to inherit, which was their house. So this generation, my 36-year-old, your kids, are the first generation, because we're living longer with dementia and with other diseases, who will not have that inheritance because we're living so long. So that's somber news, sober news and somber news. And here it is in the statistics. But in terms of policy, any of you interested in advocacy and policy? If you're interested in advocating for older folks, these statistics are really important. And the good, well, it's not good news. The impact news is that in our legislature, in our Congress, everyone is impacted by dementia now. So if we go and we tell our story, the congressperson there is broken open, like we all are, by dementia. To me, that's a crisis. It's also an opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's a tremendous opportunity we have to lobby and to use these statistics, and also then the stories. Okay, so what does it mean for us, for you here in the faith community, and also in the broader community? These statistics are these: 1 in 9 folks 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's. So I'm 63, so I look around my high school reunion. We're having our 45th next month. 1/10 of us will be living with dementia. If you live to be 85, it's 1/3. So our new Secretary of Aging in Maryland, Carmela Roque, says, good news, half of all 5-year-olds today will live to be 100. The sobering news is who will take care of them. So, oops, I keep blanking. I spoke about Maryland already. The other thing I want us to think about is, and I think about this when I go to different faith communities, I'm going to a lot, is that it doesn't hit all communities and all people equally. So 2/3 of folks living with Alzheimer's are women, but also Black African American communities have twice the prevalence of Alzheimer's than the Anglo-white communities. Latinx communities have 1.5 times the prevalence. And I think the good news is this: I just heard a lecture by, maybe you know, Dr. Deepak Chopra and Dr. Rudolph Tanzi. Tanzi's at Massachusetts General Hospital. You can imagine I've been living with fear about the genetics of dementia, right, with both my parents. They said only between 5 and 15% of our chronic illnesses, including dementia, is due to genetics. The rest is due to our access to resources they're calling social determinants of health. So we say, why do Black communities have more prevalence? Why do Latinx communities? If you look at the poverty statistics, there's a correlation. And also there's comorbidities. So if you live with diabetes, for example, you're predisposed to dementia. So check your high blood pressure, your diabetes. It's not determined, but there are comorbidities. Also hearing is real important. I'm starting to watch my hearing, and my husband, we just spent the weekend at a retreat, and we kept saying, what? I said, we need to get our hearing checked, because hearing can isolate you, and they're saying that social isolation decreases our lifespan more than smoking and more than living with diabetes. So we think about COVID, but we also think about growing old in America. You're blessed that you have a faith community. For people who aren't part of a faith community, That's really important, the isolation. Okay, so let's talk about society. So we have the numbers, and we have a little bit of a knowledge about dementia. A great book changed my life. Do you know Thomas Friedman, a Pulitzer Prize writer? Yeah. He wrote many books, but one called The World is Flat a long time ago. He wrote a less-known book called Thank You for Being Late. And in that, he talks about this time, and I bet this resonates with you, as a time of acceleration, faster than any other time in human history. Mostly because of technology, and now we have AI, right? And he does a deep dive, so my eyes glazed over, but he asks a really important question, and I asked it earlier. He says, in this age of acceleration, who's left behind? Now, the other day I tried to park my car. This is my Boston accent. Park my car. I parked my car in Harvard. No, but I parked my car to try to mail a letter at the post office. What I needed to do was download the app, the parking app. I needed to remember my license plate. I needed then to figure out the pay machine. And then I only wanted 15 minutes. I couldn't figure it out, so I ended up paying for like a day, $2. I just said, I just want to mail this letter. Anyone with a cognitive challenge does not have access to resources in our culture because what is the mediation, the interface? An account. You have to set up an account with a username and a password, even to be friends on Facebook. So think about it in terms of that social isolation piece, and think about how important your faith community is with your meals and the intergenerational interaction. It's more important than ever because of this age of acceleration. So, all right. What does it mean? So, and how can you become a dementia-friendly faith community? Let me back up too, which I should have said in the beginning. I'm here in this role because I'm part of a national movement. It's actually a global movement. When I went back home to see, actually with Nolita, when was that, 2018? Yeah, back to Malaysia. I went to Singapore and I visited their dementia-friendly coordinator. So dementia-friendly is the term for a dementia-informed community that's aware of dementia, so that at every touch point, here's the picture of the model, at every touch point in our community, whether someone is taking a bus, going to the hospital, mailing a letter, coming to pray, the people in that community know the signs and symptoms of dementia. They have basic communication tips, and they have resources. So next week, I'm training police officers, for example. Because imagine, it happened to my father, a very gentle man. He shouldn't have been driving, and he was. A cop pulled him over and said, I want your license and your registration. And my father, well into his dementia journey, said, what? And the police officer thought he was being obstinate, stubborn, non-compliant. And the police officer got agitated, and then my father got agitated. My father was looking around, and the cop thought he was going for a gun. The police officers need to know, they need to be in this dementia-friendly community. And I ask ourselves rhetorically, I don't have an answer, but I theorize, we've done pretty well, not 100%. How many of us have children or grandchildren who live with autism? At almost every touch point, if there's a child living with autism who's having a difficulty, most of us know how to respond. Or we know how to recognize, oh, this child is living with different gifts, different challenges. We don't always dial 911, and the child doesn't end up in handcuffs because of the training. So we're taking a page from the disabilities movement, and we're reframing living with dementia as living with a disability, and training everyone. Just because we're older, we should have the same supports that the children living with disabilities have. And going back to my friend Michael, he says, we have physical ramps for people using wheelchairs. We deserve cognitive ramps for older folks. who are living with dementia. I love that, cognitive ramps. So the question, and my job is to help different points here, say what will those cognitive ramps look like? I know this is going long, so I don't want to, but there are resources. So if you want to go this route, we're going to have a discussion in a moment, but if you wanted to, it depends on your goals for your year and everything, your strategic planning, but if you really wanted to become dementia capable, more dementia informed, in other words, if most of you wanted to learn the signs and symptoms of dementia, communication tips, there's a 1.5 hour series that I do and other trainers do going around the community, and it's free. It's part of Baltimore County. And I'm happy that's like the next step, is to sit. But there's also great resources on worship, on growing dementia-friendly worship. The good news too in terms of worship is they're finding that music and poetry and prayer are one of the last things to leave and often don't leave. So my parents still remembered their prayer and their hymns at the end of their lives, and we're seeing it all around, and there's actually research, there's an evidence-based program called Music and Memory. So that's one thing that faith communities are doing. They're having, I've seen Ida and her family pray. But if you have formal sessions, you may want to think about having smaller sessions with family and folks living with dementia, but we could brainstorm. Another story about that, someone called me in, actually a mutual friend of ours, Matthew, who was an exchange student, very religious. He called me in to talk to his church because there was a man who was acting out. He was grabbing women. And they said, we don't want him around, No, he's dangerous. We sat and we had a big circle called the Dementia Dialogues, and he was in the circle with his wife. And we said, this is dementia. This is what it sometimes does to the disease. This is not Jim grabbing woman. That's what it looks like. But there's a way to deal with it, to understand its disease, and to use humor, and to divert. Anyway, long story long, he was able to stay in his faith community for the next 5 years until he passed. And when he passed, apparently his wife went to our friend and said, thank you for the dementia training, because they weren't isolated, they weren't stigmatized or shamed. He wasn't allowed to do this. They had a diversion program, but they got it. So that's a real concrete example, of where people are acting out in quotes, but you understand it's not the intention, it's really the disease. So, and there are resources, as I said, not only me, but Dementia Friendly America. And for each one of these, for each one, we call these sectors or touch points, aspects of the community. There are sector guides with resources. So for the faith community, there's actually a book on dementia-friendly faith communities for the different faiths. I'd be happy to share, after this too. Also another thing that you could think about creating if you wanted, and maybe you already do it organically, but you could have special, I don't like the word support groups or the phrase, because those are also stigmatized, but I do like the word peer sharing or peer resource sharing. You could have special times, and again, maybe you do already, for caregivers, care partners. Another thing, have you heard of the Memory Cafe movement? Came over from the Netherlands. There are all kinds of memory cafes, and you could start one here. This is where caregivers and the person living with dementia come and eat together and have some kind of engaging activity for about an hour and a half. And it's a safe place. It's not a marketing place where people come and sell their programs. You just come in community, and it's a safe place for people to behave. Like we had one in a restaurant in Andover. And the first day a woman and her husband came, she said she was so embarrassed because her husband would open his wallet and show each of his IDs so proudly and say, yes, I was a veteran, I was in Vietnam, look, I was Special Forces. And then he would say it again and again for the whole hour. And we'd all take turns listening. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I said, no, this is the place where there's space for that, and it can be held. You don't have to listen. You go visit with someone else. You get a break. But we adored her husband, and he passed, and she continued to come to the cafe because this was a place where people understood. So, as I said, you think about what you want your next steps to be, if any. You could have, as I said, dementia-friendly peer sport sessions, prayer. You could also work on signage. I don't know if it's too difficult here, but sometimes places are very like labyrinths. Very hard for someone to be independent. The restrooms seem pretty well marked, but you could actually, tour the area and think about dementia friendly. Now the resources, again, I'll send this out if you want it, but here's the Alzheimer's Association helpline. Also, I'm part of the Department of Aging, as you know, and we have a caregiver program. We're having a conference. Actually, I have flyers during dinner. I'll be here and I'll put flyers out. It's free and open to all, and that is in November. And also the expo, the Great Expo. Have any of you been to the Power of Age Expo? That's coming up. And Johnny O, our county executive, is going to declare Baltimore County dementia friendly. Yay. I hope resources follow. We'll see. A great resource book, Community Resources 2023. It's up every year. I can share that. There's a line, and this has all kinds of supports for families, not only dementia, just growing old and the supports that we need to be an elder. Respite. Everyone needs a break or you burn out. This is just human. And there are different respite resources. And that's real important. Again, you can talk to me about that. So in our caregiver program, we have supports monthly, ongoing. I'm one of the people that picks up the phone and calls, and receives calls. I mentioned the events. If you want to learn more, not necessarily as a whole group, but the first Tuesday of every month, I do a virtual session for 1 hour. Signs and symptoms of dementia, communication tips, free, and it's like a Zoom. So this is my information at the end, but I want to open it up for questions and discussions, and I hope I didn't go too long. But, yeah, please.
We are so grateful that you have presented such a great thing, because all of us now getting to that stage where we're forgetful and all, we're having problems. How can we utilize your expertise, particularly being in this county, because we are here and we have a small place also where we can have some small groups together. We will really allow to have that. If you please guide us, because we don't admit that we are having problems, but we are.
Yeah, I'm here to serve. I work full time. I took a gap year after my parents died, and I said, this is actually my calling, I feel. And so, you meet your leadership group, whatever it is, and you decide, and you have me back, and I'm happy to brainstorm with you, or you can brainstorm and you decide. But I'm here to do that with you, if you'd like.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
You work for the Department of Aging,
I do.
state of Maryland.
No, the county of Baltimore.
So all the counties are the part of the state of Maryland, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the seat is in the Baltimore County,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now, question I have, very quick.
Oh, okay, sorry. He's still. Oh no, I think he's still talking.
Right.
Are you?
Temporary memory loss.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I don't know, and then all of a sudden after 2 minutes, this is Linda, this is this. That's come under starting Alzheimer or dementia or what?
Yeah, no, and so that would be part of the training, but so some memory loss is normal. It's memory loss that disrupts your life. So the example we give is if you lose your keys, we all lose our keys, my cell phone, but you find them and you don't know what to do with them, that's disruption. Yeah, that's an example.
Starting towards going to the Alzheimer or dementia?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So you want to get it assessed.
because it could be vitamin deficiency. Oh, the other thing, oh, I forgot, sorry, then I'll take, but what's really important, they say, sleep. They're finding out now that if you have sleep apnea, and many of us do, sleep actually is highly correlated to dementia now, lack of sleep. Also stress. I used to be a type A personality, pulling all-nighters, and after I saw that lecture, I got off that. I sleep, seriously. So sleep, inflammation is the other. Watch your diet. So, you know, carbs, for example, really contribute to inflammation. So this is really hard. I love rice, and rice is so high. So anyway, but inflammation, they're saying, is the root cause. And what is the root cause of inflammation? They say is stress. Stress. But sorry, she's pulling me here. So please.
They're all going through like I don't know, with the short-term memory loss. Is it a sign of dementia? I mean, later on, like we develop.
Right. No. So that's exactly what was just asked. No, not necessarily. So that's, but it is something to track. And so, and to think of a baseline. So like in my 20s, I had a bad memory. I've always had a bad memory. And I say to people, if I didn't know that about myself, I'd be really nervous. But I knew that even in graduate school, I couldn't tie my shoes sometimes. I was always like forgetful. And so, but if you are worried about it, you do want to talk to your primary, you do want to trace it, and you want to watch your stress. So like last year, I moved to be closer to my grandbaby, set up another little house, and I couldn't even tie my shoe. I was so stressed. And I thought, is this dementia? You know? So don't get nervous about it, but you do want to be aware of it and track it. And as I said, some memory loss is part of normal aging. But you want to get a whole health workup, including mental health. But if you're stressed and if you're not sleeping, this can lead to dementia, but it doesn't mean that you have dementia. Yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah.
There's another question.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Makes you think I would do that.
Yeah. 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 Let me repeat, if it's okay, so everyone can hear, because this is really important. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Merriman? Merriman was saying that her mom lived and passed with dementia in her late 90s, and she was saying, tell me if this is correct, you wish you had other resources, because you know, they figured, and a lot of families do, that we can take care of this ourselves. And usually it's too much for families. So I moved back from the Midwest, and this was my plan. I bought a house down the street from my parents so they could then move in with me. That was my family tradition, that all the elders died at home and they were cared for by the children. That's what I committed myself to. I got a job at Emerson College, moved back, and then as I saw what dementia was, I had no clue, my first rodeo. My husband was the one who said, you can't do this. We almost got divorced over it because I said, I must do it. I said, your family's different. In my family, this is what we do. And he said, you're working full time. Your mother did not work full time outside the house. So why do I digress? Because it's a lot for one family to do. If you can call on resources, especially from the faith community, where it's not shameful, you know, where people understand and they have a spiritual way of responding as well as a social and medical, that's really wonderful. And that's why I'm trying to get the word out, to say it's not a shameful thing. And families cannot do it by themselves usually, especially in the US because of the way everyone's going so fast. I mean, even in the grocery store, if you're a little slow, I don't know about you, but I'm putting my wallet back in and I'm already pushed down the line, you know? It's gonna get worse as I get older. So anyway, so families, the other thing is, yeah, in the US, the culture is this independence. I'm trying to change that, and I think the faith communities get it. It's interdependence. It's interdependence. We need each other. You know, the children need us, and the older folks need the children. But that's not the national narrative. So I'm glad you spoke, because this is so common. I'm glad you shared. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah, so just continuing to express what's so common, fear about diagnosis, especially when there's no cure. But what I am saying, and I'm with you on that. In fact, our keynote speaker at our last conference, I asked him, should people go get a diagnosis? He said, depends on the person. If it's going to be a death sentence in their psyche, they should not. But the other thing is, there's a great new book I want to recommend. Everybody get this book. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, do you know him? He was on CNN News. He was a keynote at a conference I just went to, and I got to meet him. He was so cool. But anyway, he wrote a book called Keep Sharp. And he says this, we're all doing our crossword puzzles, right, in Sudoku? He says, that's okay. What's really important for the brain is to learn something new. Like I'm trying to learn the fiddle, my poor neighbors, to learn something new. And also he says, this whole exercise thing, he said, go for a brisk walk every day with a friend and talk about your problems. Seriously. So check it out. It's called Keep Sharp. I'm over time, I think. Am I? I want to. Is there? It's up to you. It's up to you. Do we have time for one more or no? We're done. You decide. I'm going to be here. You can tell people that. Yeah.
They can talk to me.
Sounds great. Yeah. You can tell. Go ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emily Kearns. It was a wonderful presentation, and you can see the energy the audience has, and they have a lot of more questions. So, as a token of appreciation, we have a certificate for you. And where is brother? Page 5 of it. I want to also have the brother Koga over here. आप भी आ जाएं। That was really great. Thank you very, very much. So you have to eat now.
These all are shy people.
And again, if you have questions, she is going to be here during the dinner session. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by at her table and ask the question. Oh, brother Tufan Chaudhary, he's our president, and we completed it.
He's still in jet lag.
Thank you all.
May I have another picture with you?
Okay. You want this? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Next one.
Okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, doctor. It was a nice lecture and it was important information for everyone. I hope so.